Hello and welcome to my channel and to this video, which I think might be the start of a new series. I am gonna do some oil painting and chat about something art related. And I'll probably stick to things that I have at least a little bit of experience in. So today we're gonna start with finding time for art because honestly, I have struggled with that so much this year. I've not done a very good job, so it feels pretty relevant. I started a new job in April, and I would say that it's taken until now pretty much to try and fit in the amount of painting that I would like to do, and it's November, so it has taken a while. I think there are so many reasons why it's tough to fit painting in, especially when you're busy with other stuff. Some of my struggles have been that my days off end up getting filled up pretty quickly with all of the things I don't get time to do on my regular job days, so they're not quite the uninterrupted painting time I thought that they might be. I also really struggle to schedule painting time. I don't like to paint at the same time every day. I like to paint spontaneously, and I think when that is the case, it is so easy for painting to get pushed off your to-do list. So if you can paint at the same time every day and it becomes routine, then it just becomes a habit and you're aware that that's your painting time. But if you don't have scheduled time, then you end up getting busy with everything else, and so it's really easy to get to the end of the day and realize that you haven't done any painting. And even though I know that, it's still not enough to make me be able to schedule painting time because I just can't stick to it. So I've come up with some tips that have been helpful to me, and I'm going to share them with you, and they're kind of based on the opinion of an artist who doesn't do very well with routine. So these are really all about making the most of whatever opportunities you can get. So I've tried to break these down into three main areas because this time lapse is only about 12 minutes long, and so I can't really fit much more in than that, so we're going to try and prioritize. So here's the Cliff Notes version if you don't want to watch the whole video. Number one has meant streamlining my painting practice, so it's super easy to start painting at a moment's notice. The second tip has involved trying to change the way that I paint so that I can make the most of shorter periods of free time. And the third point has been to make sure that I am really enthusiastic and excited about the paintings that I'm creating, which sounds a bit odd when it comes to finding spare time for art, but I will explain it a little bit later. So the first point on the list is probably something that you've heard before, like it's nothing new, but I think it's so helpful. And that was to try and streamline your painting process so it's really easy to get started painting at a moment's notice. And this has been really helpful for me, someone who doesn't like routine, because if you're not going to schedule in time for your art, then when that time does become available, you need to be ready to go pretty quickly. Like if it's going to take you 20 minutes to find everything and get set up, then you're probably not going to bother. So what that looks like for me is I try and leave things as accessible as possible, and I try and remove any obstacles getting in the way of me painting. This is a bit easier said than done when you don't have any studio space. I work on the dining room table, so I do have to pack my things away to some extent. But I do try to leave things out where possible and as accessible as possible. So I paint on a desk easel a lot of the time, and when I'm finished for the day, I'll just lift it off the table and bring it into another room where it is slightly more out of the way. I also like to clean my brushes and wipe my palette down when I finish using it so that they are ready to go whenever I next have painting time. I keep all of my paints in a carrier bag. It's not very aesthetic, but it is handy. When I'm ready to paint, I just grab the bag and just dump it next to my chair and I'm ready to get started. Basically, I just want everything to be as streamlined as possible, because if I have some unexpected painting time, I don't want to spend 20 minutes looking for everything. I just want to be ready to go. The next tip involved making changes to how I paint to try and make the most of really small painting opportunities, because I wasn't really doing that before. I mean, chances are it's probably going to be easier for you to find half an hour spare than it is to find a half day or a full day spare to paint. And before, I was really bad at utilizing that time, because I always felt that if I was going to do an oil painting, I wanted at least half a day to do it. Otherwise, it just felt like a bit of a waste because I didn't feel like I would be able to get enough done. And to an extent, I still can see that point of view. But the problem with that is that I was wasting so many opportunities, because those half an hours and hours here and there, they really add up. And it just seemed a shame not to be doing anything with that time. So I'm going to share what I have done to try and make the most of these shorter periods of free time, but I'm not necessarily suggesting that you change your entire painting practice, because I've made some fairly big changes and I've made them because they work better for me anyway, but that might not be the case for everybody. So I guess this is going to be an individual thing. So one thing I've started to do is I am attempting to work on multiple paintings at the same time. And I didn't used to do this all the time before, but it's so helpful. And I know that not everyone's going to like doing this, but I will explain. And then maybe you can decide if it sounds like it's for you or not. So I have found that in every painting project, there are parts of it that seem to take a really long time that would be best done over a full day, and then there are also parts that don't take so long, and those parts could include sketching your idea out onto a canvas or coming up with some composition ideas. They could also include doing maybe a block in, like an initial color layer where you don't have to add any detail. That might be doable in a short amount of time, I guess, depending on the size of a painting. And the reason doing multiple paintings is helpful with this, because we kind of seem to have got off track here, is because the more paintings I do, the more of those shorter jobs are available. So there is nearly almost always something I can be doing when I come across that short period of free time. When I was working on just one painting at a time, I would always get to a stage where I couldn't do any more yet, either until I had like a full day where I could do as much painting as I needed to, or until the first few layers had dried so I could do the next bit. And during that time when I was just waiting, there was so much opportunity to be painting and there was nothing I could be doing on that specific painting. So just by having multiple things on the go at once, there's usually always something I can be working on. I'm also looking at adjusting how I paint individual paintings. So there was a time when I used to work on paintings as a whole piece, and I'd try and do everything in one sitting, working alla prima, painting wet in wet, and I'd work from dark to light and I'd do the whole thing all together. And those paintings are not very good if you only have an hour spare, because obviously you can't get it to a place where it's finished in that amount of time. And if I left it half finished, it was always very difficult to carry on with it, because by the time I got back to it, the paint was dry or tacky and I struggled to work over the top of it. So if I was painting like that, it was always really difficult to make the most of those shorter amounts of time that became available, so I just wouldn't do anything at all. Now I try and paint slightly differently, and I only do this because it is helpful to me anyway, and I kind of like painting this way. So now I try to paint one section at a time. So for example, if I'm doing a dog pet portrait, instead of doing the whole thing all together, if I only have an hour spare, I'll maybe just paint the ears, and I'll paint them until they're completely finished, and then it doesn't matter if I have to put that paint into one side, because even if the ears dry up, I don't have to work on the ears anymore, so it doesn't matter if it gets all tacky. I will just move on to another section the next time, and I'm finding that that has been quite helpful to me. I do have to be careful where it joins onto the rest of the painting, that's sometimes tricky, but it's definitely given me another option, so I don't necessarily have to wait until I've got a full day spare before I start doing something like that. Obviously, these tips seem quite specific to my painting situation, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is what I really needed to do here to try and find time for painting was figure out how I could adjust my practice to make the most of those shorter periods of time that are just so much more likely to become available than full days here and there. The third point that has really helped me to try and find a bit more time for art has been to work on my enthusiasm and motivation for painting, which sounds really odd, and I get that. Especially if you paint as a hobby, then enthusiasm is probably not something you need to work on. And it's not normally for me, but I also paint as a business and I love to do that, but it also presents some problems sometimes. Occasionally I might have a stretch where I do a lot of commission work and even my originals start to feel like they're not quite my own. I've found that sometimes I do paintings that are more for what I think people are looking for, and they're less about what I am really excited to paint. So what that has looked like for me is I really like to paint in miniature and I like to paint variety. And instead of doing that, I have been trying to paint larger, and I've also been trying to do a collection of paintings because I just got the impression that that's what I should be doing as an artist. That generally I thought people probably want bigger paintings because they look better on the wall, and people probably like collections because they tie all the work together and they look like they're made by the same artist, and it just kind of felt like the professional thing that I should have been doing. So for a long time I've been trying to do that, and I've been ignoring the miniature paintings that I'd really like to do, and I've also not been painting as much variety as I normally would like to. And recently I've decided to give up on that. I'm just going to paint the things I want to paint. If I want to paint small, I'm going to paint small. And if I want to paint a bunch of different things that are not connected, I'm going to do that. That might not be the best business advice. Perhaps that could be the subject of another video, but it's what I would like to paint. And I think I need to try and make room for that. I think it's a balance between doing the things that I want to do and also doing other commission work. But I really want to start prioritizing painting my kind of paintings. And if you are wondering what on earth that has to do with finding time for painting, then I am going to get to the point now. And that point is, it can be hard work trying to prioritize painting time, especially when you're super busy. It's not always the easy thing to do. And if you're not feeling super enthusiastic about painting, it's even easier to push it to one side. But now that I'm focusing on painting my kind of thing, I'm so excited to paint that I'm finding opportunities to paint all the time. And so that kind of brings us to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed listening to these rambles, and hopefully you found something helpful in there. The only other thing I would add on to the end of this video is that even though I've spent a lot of time trying to fit in art and make sure that I'm not wasting any time, I'm also making sure that I still set some of that time aside to have an actual break, because otherwise I'm going to be burnt out and I'm going to be overworked. So I still make sure that I am having days off or just some time away from any kind of job, and that way I get the break I need and I can come back feeling really motivated and ready to paint again. And that is the end of today's video. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any ideas for future art topics, then please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.